Welcome to First Issues. Even after being on air for so long, the mandate of First Issues still remains steadfast in being an informative and educational program. This extends to busting myths, misconceptions, misinformation around certain ideologies and concepts, amongst them estate planning and wills. We have heard of the stories where people believe that if they draft a will while alive, superstition dictates they will perish before that time. This is usually not seen as a sound financial planning exercise that will help with the management of one's estate once they have passed away. And rightfully so, to a certain degree, because to the layman, sometimes such words as estate planning, estate management, and wills are only ever heard of after somebody has died. In the interest of educating the masses, we sought the expertise of Refilwe Mogwe, Fiduciary Specialist at Botswana Life Insurance Limited, to help with the demystification of estate planning and the drafting of wills, first by defining what these concepts are. Refilwe, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We're here today to talk about estate and wills, or the planning of, right? But in that context, what is somebody's estate when they are planning their will?
Thank you, Bonatsego, and thank you for having us and Botswana Life. So in the context of estate planning, an estate is basically the sum of a person's, gross value of their assets less their liabilities. However, it's not that simple. It also includes, all other interests that a person has in their estate in the event that they should pass on. So we basically take into account the assets that you have, the responsibilities that you have within your estate. If you have children, how will they be taken care of? And basically that can be known as your estate. But in its simplest form, it's the net value between your assets and your liabilities on death. So that is what is deemed as your estate.
Speaking of death, how is a deceased person estate wound up? What does it even mean when you say you're winding up somebody's estate?
So a deceased estate is wound up by taking into account what it is that they had in the event that they passed on, the obligations or responsibilities they had to third parties in the event of passing on. And that could be, if you have liabilities, if you have responsibility of now taking care of your children, all of that is taken into account. Now, if you do it through the Master of the High Court, your estate is registered. We start with the process of then getting an appreciation of your inventory. But before that, a death notice has to be sent to the master. So it's a form that you get from the Master of the High Court, and you fill it out, and it just basically tries to appreciate. It's more like a data collection form. Who you are, were you married, did you have kids, on average, how much does your estate look like, and then the next stage is then to present the inventory to the master. Thereafter, what then happens is once you filled the death form and presented it, and perhaps nominated who would be your executor, and the master then, I would say, agrees with that and issues with a letter of administration, the next thing would be then to try and then appreciate what actually is in the estate. And sometimes what happens in that situation, you find that people have to appreciate, okay, if it was Refilwe who passed on, if she had 5 houses, how much were they worth? And then actually get the exact value. So you may need to even engage valuers to establish the actual costs or values of the assets that are in your estate. It's just basically a rough estimate of what it is that I have, what people owe me, or what I owe people. And then once that is done, what we then do is we then have to write to the master and request to proceed and advertise for notice of debtors and creditors. This way now, if you have minors who are entitled to be maintained by you as the deceased, they may claim against your estate.
Let's speak some more on the expenses, right? Are there any costs or expenses that might be related to somebody laying a claim on a deceased estate?
Yeah, there might be expenses that are associated with your estate. I think I've spoken about them. Another expense may depend on how you passed on. If you were hospitalized for a very long time and maybe medical aid could not cover everything and you didn't have sufficient cover in the form of your life covers to augment that, those expenses or the excess or that maybe you cannot shoulder may need to be paid from your estate. And so those are the types of expenses that typically come up. It used to be that things like transfer duty, capital transfer tax were a factor, but the Transfer Duty Act and the Capital Transfer Tax Act have been amended to ensure that there is some relief to beneficiaries where or in inheritance terms. So right now we don't pay transfer duty when inheriting, but we need to be aware of the importance of factoring in these types of tax expenses, because laws change all the time, and as they get reviewed, we need to stay abreast of that. I'll give you an example. In South Africa, they have what they call estate duty. So they kind of simplistically, it's more like inheritance tax or wealth tax. So it's based on the gross value of your estate, over and above all other expenses that you may charge an estate. So we're still getting there. Laws are still developing, and this is something that may likely come up in the future. And even if it doesn't, there are other expenses to consider. Another important expense to consider is fees, like professional fees that you need to pay your professionals. I've already spoken about valuation fees. The other one is your executor fees. These are expenses that you pay the person who's responsible for winding up your affairs. So clients sometimes say, look, I don't need to appoint an executor. I think you really do. You need to appoint an executor because it's a professional. And if the way I've been speaking about this process, and I'm not yet done in terms of how it concludes, it needs someone who is meticulous and is trained in this field and understands a bit of accounting, a bit of law, a bit of tax. So because there can be some serious implications if a distribution is not done right.